The last time I made an ambient video was actually with the Korg Volca FM2, and here we are with the MicroKorg 2, and we're going to be making some ambient again. Is there something about Korg gear that makes me want to ambient? Of course, you may have noticed that this is a black MicroKorg. This is actually an exclusive model that Guitar Center offers, and I've left an affiliate link in the description of this video. Another awesome thing about Guitar Center is that they have a used/vintage section. So if you'd like to pick up used gear, like I myself often like to do, check out the link in the description for that. In my opinion, pretty much any synth can ambient. There's just a few basic things that you need to make that happen, all of which the MicroKorg 2 offers us, which we're going to be seeing today. When it really comes down to the generative side of things, having a solid sequencer is extremely helpful for that sort of thing. The Oxi One, in my opinion, is perfect for generative sequencing, something that has note probability, multiple sequencer types, randomized velocity per step, randomized gate per step, and a bunch of other parameters that we could use to make things generative. And then of course, kind of as like a side note, we have the Lyra 8, which is very useful to make things generative in a organismic way. We're essentially using this as an effects box. So, this is controlling the MicroKorg 2, audio out into audio in, external in of the Lyra 8, and then out into my mixer. That's the setup. Let's make some ambient. Of course, the first thing we need to do is find our sound. So I'm actually just gonna lay down, this is a mono sequencer, so it's just playing the note. And as you can see, because the preset is called flow fifth, you could hear that there's a fifth on top of it, so that's kind of nice. This particular oscillator is very muted. Oscillator 2, what does that add? Right, so it's a very similar sort of frequency, so might not be the best idea to mix both of these together. And what's this third one? Okay, so that gives us a much higher frequency. Noise. It could sound like the ocean, perhaps. I'm kind of a sucker for noise, but I'm not crazy about this noise in particular. So we'll scroll over to noise, see what kind of colors we can get here. Okay, and let's go to that first oscillator and maybe shape this a little bit. The cool thing about the MicroKorg 2 is that I'm not going to say it's a beginner synth. It's definitely a beginner friendly synth. Like, you have enough to sculpt the sounds, or a general idea of the sounds that you like. I wouldn't say that it's the strongest sound design tool, but it definitely gives you enough. It gives you what you need. Let's go to the third oscillator and maybe throw a different sample into here. I kind of like this one, and we could add something basic like chorus. I know there's a lo-fi which I might use. Just a slight bit of wow, because I'm a sucker for it. We can add a ton of saturation here if we want to, but remember that this is all digital. I want to leave a little bit for the Lyra 8. Because we're using two different sequencers here, so this one in particular, this is the matricial sequencer, which I would say it lends itself a little bit more to plucky, quicker rhythms. I'm just going to throw in a rhythm here. And I'm actually going to mute this first sequencer here. This is the sequencer in particular where we could really turn this into a generative thing with all of the different parameters that we have to work with here. Okay, I want a bit of a tempo here, so let's say this one. Right, so now we have a tempo to go off of, which we could get rid of later. Why don't we go ahead and change the scale here? I'm going to change it to something that lends itself to ambient. I would say Dorian is good for this. Okay, so right now we just have triggers. Let's actually throw some notes in here. Less notes. Very cool. Interval, let's throw a couple of those in there. And I'm going to shorten this particular sequence. This is the interval sequence. So everything's changing. And now because the sequence is like an odd time, it becomes more and more generative. Pulses. Let's throw a pulse. Let's say I'm just going to put a pulse on this note in particular. And And I'm going to shorten this as well to 5 notes. This sequence here is holding everything together. Like if I muted this, now it's like you kind of lose the tempo, which could be cool if that's what you're going for, but for constructing something generative, I like to have like a pulse like this that holds it together. And I may or may not keep it, I don't know. It also happens to be our root note, so it's keeping us in C Dorian. The next thing I could add here is velocity. So I'm going to randomize this velocity 100%. Again, I'm going to change the length of this sequence. Trig probability is another thing we could add into here for some more generativeness. What if I wanted these 2 notes that are holding the tempo, if I wanted that to be down an octave? Maybe down an octave again. Ooh, there we go. Maybe make this a 5th. This is quite slow. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Venture a little bit further into ambient land through the Lyra 8. The first sequence I have here, what if I put this back on? Because remember, this is holding the note, so it's cool to have that in the sequence as well. If we step a little bit further into this little dice here, the randomize function, if I want to, I could bring down the trigger amount, so let's say 90%, there's even less probability there. Re-trigger, let's say I want re-triggering 5% of the time. And then up the octave 5% of the time. I don't know the exact polyphony, I'll put it on the screen now, but because the MicroKorg 2 is polyphonic, it works really well for this type of setup. But if you wanted to go into a bit more depth, let's say with the Oxi One, it might be cool to have a synth that has several voices, like a lot of the Electron boxes, maybe the Digitac 2, the Analog 4 is another great option, because then you could have this sort of like orchestra sort of thing that's going on, and you could assign it to different voices. Let's give the Lyra a little bit more love here. We could modulate this to the LFO if we want to, the modulate. I'm not a huge fan of this because it's very like square. But don't forget that we're going into a mixer, so this, through some more reverb, could actually be pretty cool. So that gets really weird. I'm actually going to bring this back to self. And again, if we want to, this is the matricial sequencer. If I'm like, this is sounding a bit too sad or whatever, I could change the color. Everything that's happening within the matricial sequencer right now is generative, but if we don't want it to be, if we want to create phrases, let's say, I could change the length of this sequence on, let's say, this note right here. Because it's so slow, let's make it a 16-step sequence. And now it becomes that repetitive sequence. And now all of a sudden we have something that's really bright and major sounding, repetitive. If I want to increase the length of that sequence, let's do that. Now we have different notes coming in there, and it repeats. So now we've obviously stepped out of generative land because it's a repeat phrase, but it works just as well, honestly. Let's go back to generative land though. So it's quite a few tools to work with, but this combination is extremely fun. I can of course play on top of this, but I don't even have to. It just gives me everything that I need right here. If you like what you heard here and you'd like to see exclusive videos just like this, check out my Patreon. That's linked in the description. There's also an affiliate link for the MicroKorg 2 in the description. Thanks for being here and hope to see you in the next one.